In 2007, I was messing around on the internet and fell in love with a mature stranger. I literally thought we were going to get married until I found out it was my dad's friend, and that's when I went from love-struck to hell-bent on revenge. Back in the day. 2007, me and my friend would go on random chat rooms, typically gaming ones, and annoy some of the guys on it. I was around 14, so this was peak entertainment. But one time, we took it too far. A random guy called Victor asked me out, so I said yes. We were both giggling, thinking that this was nothing more than some harmless joke. Plus, he told me he was 27, while knowing my age, so I honestly didn't care about hurting him, because, well, duh. And within 20 minutes, he was sending me photos of roses and chocolates. At that point, me and my friend were laughing so hard I almost destroyed the computer screen, because he started sending me screenshots of wedding dresses and flight tickets to countries where the legal age is 12. He was literally calling me gorgeous without knowing anything about what I looked like, other than having brown eyes and brown hair. But slowly, our laughter faltered, because when I wasn't agreeing to hop on a flight with him, he got mad. Like, really mad. It was obvious, because he started spamming with texts calling me a W word and calling me a fat HE. I know it sounds dumb, but for some reason his texts actually started to hurt. This wave of guilt washed over me. In the midst of his texts, I turned to my friend and she looked at me with a, "You should probably apologize" look in her eyes. And within minutes, I had been manipulated into thinking I owed him. That's how it started. The next 2 years of my life were spent texting this coercive stranger on the internet, and he didn't just find out what I looked like. Number with my IP address. He found my home address, school, parents' names, literally everything. He was insane. Meanwhile, I didn't even know his face or real name. No one even knew about him. I had lied to my friend that I cut him off, and my family just thought I had a secret boyfriend or something. And then texting wasn't enough for him anymore. Through the art of blackmail and making me feel special, he convinced me to stay on call with him all night while we slept. And when I started getting bullied in high school, he was the one that was there for me. He would say all the right things, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love with him. I didn't even want to talk to anyone else. Every Friday, he would send me a surprise package. One time, it was a record player. Another time, it was a collection of all my favorite books. There was no doubt in my mind that he was the love of my life. But when I found out who it was, my life crumbled forever. Because while we were on call, while he was half asleep, he mumbled, "I love you, Emmy." I was instantly filled with disgust. My name was Emily, and there was only one other person who called me that, my dad. Except it didn't make any sense because he barely knew how to send a text. I sat there frozen, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them making any sense. I replayed the audio over and over in my head, trying to convince myself I'd misheard, but I knew what I'd heard. The next day, I couldn't concentrate on anything at school. I kept replaying that moment in my head. Was it possible that my dad had been pretending to be Victor this whole time? The thought made me physically sick. I actually had to excuse myself from class to throw up in the school bathroom. I sat in a stall for almost an hour, trying to make sense of what I'd heard and what it might mean. When I got home, I watched my dad like a hawk, looking for any sign, any slip-up that might confirm my suspicions. He acted completely normal though, complained about his day at work, asked about school, watched his usual TV shows. There was no way he could be that good of an actor, right? Plus, he was technologically inept. This was a man who once called me into his office because he couldn't figure out how to attach a file to an email. The Victor I knew was tech-savvy and smooth, nothing like my bumbling middle-aged dad. I decided to do some investigating on my own. I waited until my parents went to bed, then snuck into their room to check my dad's phone. Nothing suspicious there, just work emails and texts to my mom and his friends. No second phone hidden anywhere either. I checked his drawers, his closet, even under the mattress. Next, I checked the computer history, but it was all normal stuff. Sports websites, news, nothing that would indicate he was living a double life as my online boyfriend. I started to think maybe I'd misheard Victor. Maybe he'd said something else entirely, but deep down, I knew what I'd heard. That night, when Victor called, I was prepared. I had set up my phone to record our conversation. I asked him casual questions about his day, his work, trying to get any information that might confirm or deny my suspicions. He was vague as always, claiming he worked in tech, but never giving specifics. He'd change the subject whenever I pressed for details, smoothly redirecting the conversation back to me and my day. This was a pattern I hadn't fully noticed before, how he always kept the focus on me while revealing almost nothing about himself. Then I took a risk. I asked him if he'd ever been to my hometown. There was a pause, longer than normal. He said he'd passed through once or twice but didn't know it well. I could tell he was lying. There was a hesitation in his voice that hadn't been there before, a slight nervousness that was completely out of character for the always confident Victor. For the first time, I felt like I was getting closer to the truth. The next day was Saturday, and my dad mentioned he was going to meet up with some friends to watch a game. This was my chance. I followed him from a distance, being careful not to be seen. I wore a hoodie pulled down low over my face and kept several people between us as he walked downtown. town. To my surprise, he actually did go to a sports bar downtown. I watched through the window as he greeted several men, all roughly his age. They sat at a large table, ordering beers and watching the game on the big screens. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just a group of middle-aged guys enjoying sports and beers on a weekend. I was about to leave, feeling stupid for suspecting my dad, when one of the men caught my eye. He was a bit younger than the others, maybe early 30s, with dark hair. There was something familiar about him, even though I'd never seen Victor. I couldn't explain it, but I felt drawn to watch this particular man. He kept checking his phone nervously. When my dad went to the bathroom, this man immediately leaned over to talk to another guy at the table, a heavy-set bald man with glasses. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language was intense, secretive. They stopped talking the moment my dad returned, transitioning seamlessly back to casual sports conversation. It seemed oddly practiced, like they were used to having secret discussions when my dad wasn't around. I took a quick photo with my phone and left before anyone noticed me. That night, when Victor called, I asked him to describe himself to me. I played it off as romantic curiosity, saying I wanted to picture him better in my mind. He hesitated, then gave a description that could fit millions of men. Average height, dark hair, athletic build, nothing distinctive. But his voice, there was something about it that suddenly reminded me of the dark-haired man at the bar. I couldn't be sure, but my gut was telling me there was a connection. Something in the cadence of his speech, the way he emphasized certain words. It matched my memory of seeing the dark-haired man talking animatedly to his friend when my dad was in the bathroom. The next morning, my dad left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. I knew his password from watching him enter it before. I quickly scrolled through his contacts until I found the names of the men I recognized from the bar. There was Mike, Luke, Trevor, and Bailey. I wrote down their full names and put the phone back exactly where I found it, carefully positioning it the same way so he wouldn't notice it had been moved. I felt guilty snooping through his phone, but I needed answers. Later that day, I searched for them on social media. Luke and Trevor had private accounts, but Mike and Bailey were public. Mike's profile showed a typical middle-aged guy. Family photos, fishing trips, nothing unusual. Scrolling through Bailey's photos, my heart nearly stopped. There he was, the dark-haired man from the bar. According to his profile, his name was Bailey Wilson, and he worked as an IT consultant. That checked out with Victor's claim of working in tech. His profile showed him at various tech conferences and networking events, often with a drink in hand, looking confident and charismatic, exactly how I'd imagined Victor would be. But the real shocker came when I saw a comment my dad had left on one of his photos from 3 years ago. "Thanks for setting up my new computer. Couldn't have done it without you." That's when it clicked. My dad wasn't Victor. Bailey was. And somehow, my dad knew him well enough to have him over to our house years ago. I scrolled frantically through more photos, finding several of Bailey and my dad together at various events, poker nights, football games, even a fishing trip. They weren't just casual acquaintances. They were good friends. The pieces were starting to come together, but I still didn't understand why Bailey would target me specifically, or how he knew to call me Emmy, my dad's special nickname for me. I decided to dig deeper into my dad's relationship with these men. I checked his email next time he left his computer unlocked. Searching for Bailey's name brought up dozens of results going back years. They were clearly friends, but the emails were mostly about normal stuff. Sports, getting together for drinks, occasional tech help. Nothing sinister stood out. They referenced inside jokes I didn't understand, and made plans for regular poker nights. I was about to give up when I noticed my dad had a password-protected folder on his desktop labeled simply B Files. It took me days of careful observation to finally catch him entering the password. My mom's birthday backward. It was such a simple, predictable password, 02141968 instead of 19681402. When I finally got into the folder, I wished I hadn't. It contained financial records, payments made monthly to Bailey Wilson for the past 2 years. The exact 2 years I'd been talking to Victor. The dates aligned perfectly with when our online relationship began. The amounts varied, but they were substantial, $500 to $1,000 each month. Some months had additional payments labeled extras or special delivery, which I realized sickly must have been for the elaborate gifts Victor sent me, and the memo line on each payment simply said, Emily Services. My stomach dropped to the floor. The evidence was right there in front of me. My dad had been paying his friend Bailey to groom me online. But why? What kind of father would do that to his own daughter? I scanned through the rest of the folder, finding spreadsheets tracking conversation topics, my emotional reactions, and notes about my progress, whatever that meant. There were even some chat logs between Bailey and my dad discussing specific things to say to me. One message from my dad read, "She mentioned trouble with girls at school today. Use that to build trust." It was all a calculated, sick game to them. I printed out the financial records and hid them in my room. I needed more proof before confronting anyone. The printouts felt like they were burning a hole in my backpack as I carried them home from the library where I'd printed them. I kept checking to make sure they were still there, terrified someone would find them before I was ready. I decided to set a trap. The next time Victor called, I casually mentioned that my dad had been acting weird lately, talking about his friend Bailey a lot. There was a long pause, then Victor quickly changed the subject. That slight hesitation told me everything I needed to know. His voice had wavered just enough to confirm my suspicions. The confident, smooth-talking Victor suddenly sounded nervous, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Next, I borrowed Kaylee's phone and texted Victor, pretending to be a friend of his. I wrote, "Hey Bailey, we still on for poker Friday?" He replied instantly, "Wrong number," but the damage was done. He'd responded to the name. I had him. He hadn't questioned why someone was calling him Bailey. He'd just denied the plans. If he truly wasn't Bailey, he would have been confused by the name. I showed Kaylee the exchange, and she finally understood why I'd been acting so strange lately. She was horrified and insisted we tell her parents immediately, but I wasn't ready yet. I needed to understand the full picture first. While all this was happening, the gifts kept coming. That Friday's package contained an expensive camera, the exact model I'd mentioned wanting months ago. I didn't touch it. It felt tainted now, knowing where it had come from and why. I left it in its box, pushed to the back of my closet. Every time I looked at it, I felt physically ill, thinking about how many conversations had been analyzed and reported back to my dad before this perfect gift was selected. I needed to understand the full extent of what was happening. What was my dad getting out of this arrangement? Was he just watching from the sidelines, or was there something more sinister going on? The thought of my own father being involved in something so twisted made me question everything I thought I knew about my family and my childhood. I decided to confront Bailey first, not my dad. I set up a fake email account and sent him a message with the subject line, "I know everything, Bailey." In the body, I simply attached the financial records and a photo I'd taken of him at the bar. I wanted to see how he would react when caught off guard, without my dad there to coordinate their response. His response came within minutes. "We need to talk, not over email." He included a phone number, not Victor's number, but a different one. His real number, I assumed. He was suddenly dropping the Victor persona completely, not even attempting to maintain the charade. I didn't call. Instead, I forwarded the whole exchange to Kaylee for safekeeping, just in case something happened to me. I was genuinely scared about what these men might do when confronted. If they'd been capable of this elaborate deception for years, what else might they be capable of? The next day was Sunday dinner at our house, a weekly tradition where my mom would make a big meal, and we'd all sit around the table together like the perfect family we clearly weren't. To my absolute horror, my dad announced we were having a guest, his friend Bailey, who had been wanting to meet the family properly. My mom seemed to know who he was, greeting him like an old acquaintance. I felt like I was going to throw up right there at the dinner table. Throughout the meal, Bailey kept giving me these looks when my parents weren't watching, smirks that said, "I know you know." I couldn't eat a bite. The food sat untouched on my plate as I tried to process the fact that Victor, the man I'd shared my deepest thoughts and feelings with for 2 years, was sitting across from me at my family dinner table, making small talk with my mom about her garden. After dinner, Bailey offered to help me with a computer problem I'd supposedly mentioned to my dad. Before I could object, my dad was ushering us both to my room, saying he was glad Bailey could help since he wasn't good with technology. The irony of this statement, given what I now knew, made me want to scream. My dad, the man who pretended to be technologically inept while orchestrating this entire situation, was now pushing me into a room alone with my predator under the guise of getting tech help. Once my bedroom door was closed, Bailey's demeanor changed completely. "So, Emily, or should I say, sweetie, how much do you think you know?" he asked in a voice that was undeniably Victor's. I backed away toward my window. "I know my dad's been paying you. I know you've been pretending to be someone else. I know about the Emily services," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Bailey laughed, a cold sound nothing like Victor's warm chuckle. "Your dad has some interesting tastes, Emily. He likes to watch. Did you know that? Every call, every text he gets to see. It was his idea, actually. Said he wanted to keep you safe from real predators by creating a controlled environment with someone he trusted." I felt physically ill. "That's not protection, that's abuse," I managed to say. Bailey shrugged. "Call it what you want. The arrangement works for everyone. I get paid, your dad gets his kicks, and you get attention from someone who actually cares about your boring teenage life. Win-win-win." In that moment, I hated him more than I'd ever hated anyone, but I kept my cool. "What do you think would happen if my mom found out? Or the police?" His smile faltered for a second. "Nobody would believe you. And if you tried anything, well, I have 2 years of inappropriate conversations with a minor saved. Who do you think gets in trouble there? Plus, your dad would just say you're making it all up for attention." He had a point, but he'd made one critical mistake, underestimating how much evidence I'd gathered. "Bailey, I've been recording this entire conversation," I lied, reaching for my phone. "And I have the financial records. And Kaylee knows everything too." That hit home. His face darkened. "You stupid little—" He lunged toward me, but I was ready. I ducked past him and ran out of my room, straight to the living room where my parents were watching TV. "Emily, what's wrong?" my mom asked, seeing my face. I was breathing hard, tears streaming down my cheeks, but I couldn't form words. The reality of what was happening, that my own father had orchestrated my my online grooming was too overwhelming to articulate. Before I could speak, Bailey appeared, perfectly composed again. "Computer issues are fixed, John," he said to my dad. "Emily's all set now." The way my dad nodded, not even questioning why I looked terrified, confirmed everything. He knew. He'd always known. I couldn't confront them right then. It wasn't safe. Instead, I mumbled something about homework and went back to my room, locking the door behind me. That night, I didn't answer when Victor called. Instead, I packed a bag with essentials and the evidence I'd gathered. I took only what I needed: clothes, toiletries, my school backpack, and the folder with all the printouts. I left behind all the gifts Victor had given me over the years. They weren't gifts, they were payment for my exploitation. Early the next morning, I snuck out and went straight to Kaylee's house. Her parents were confused, but let me in when they saw how upset I was. I told Kaylee everything, showing her the proof. She was horrified. Her mom, a social worker, overheard parts of our conversation and asked me to explain what was going on. I was terrified to talk to an adult about it, afraid they wouldn't believe me or would somehow blame me. But Kaylee's mom sat patiently, listening to the whole story without judgment. After hearing the whole story, she immediately called the police. The next few weeks were a blur of police interviews, court appearances, and social services meetings. They took my phone and computer as evidence, interviewed my teachers, and even spoke to some of my online friends to corroborate details of my story. Bailey was arrested first, my dad shortly after. My mom collapsed when she learned the truth, swearing she had no idea what had been happening. I believed her. The betrayal in her eyes couldn't be faked. She alternated between hysterical crying and stunned silence, unable to process how the man she'd been married to for 17 years could do something so terrible to their daughter. The evidence was overwhelming. The police found everything on Bailey's computer: all our conversations, videos of me from my webcam that I never knew were being recorded, and explicit exchanges between him and my dad discussing their arrangement. There were detailed reports about my emotional state, my vulnerabilities, and strategies for making me more dependent on Victor. They found payments going back even before our first conversation, planning payments for setting up the Emily Project, as they called it. It turned out I wasn't Bailey's first victim either. There had been 2 other girls before me, both around my age when it started. Both had been connected to friends of his, though neither case involved the girl's father as mine did. The patterns were identical: careful grooming, expensive gifts, emotional manipulation, all while reporting back to the adult who'd set up the arrangement. The court case was brutal. I had to testify, describing in detail how I'd been manipulated and groomed. Sitting in that witness box, feeling everyone's eyes on me as I recounted the most humiliating experience of my life, was almost as traumatic as the grooming itself. I kept my eyes fixed on the prosecutor, avoiding looking at Bailey or my dad at the defense table. Bailey's lawyer tried to paint me as a willing participant who was lying to avoid embarrassment, but the evidence spoke for itself. The financial records, the conversation logs, the detailed reports, it all pointed to a calculated effort to exploit a minor. My dad refused to look at me throughout the entire trial. When it was his turn to testify, he claimed he was trying to protect me by monitoring my online activities through someone he trusted. He said he'd discovered I was already talking to older men online, a complete lie, and decided to create a safe alternative where he could oversee the interactions. The judge didn't buy it. His explanation fell apart under cross-examination, especially when confronted with messages where he specifically instructed Bailey on how to manipulate my emotions. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts for both of them. Bailey got 15 years for multiple counts of child exploitation and grooming. My dad got 12 years as an accessory and for child endangerment. There were also charges related to the production of child exploitation material, since they had recorded and stored videos from my webcam without my knowledge. The sentence announcements should have made me feel better, but they didn't. My life as I knew it was over. My mom and I couldn't stay in our house. Too many memories, too many neighbors who knew what had happened. We sold most of our belongings in a hurried estate sale and moved across the state to live with my grandmother. I had to change schools right in the middle of high school, leaving behind the few friends I had. I switched from a school where I'd known most kids since elementary to being the new girl with the mysterious past. The story followed me, though. Someone always seemed to find out, and the whispers would start all over again. That's the girl whose dad paid someone to be her online boyfriend. I heard she was sending nudes to older men. The rumors were always worse than the reality, but the reality was bad enough. Therapy helped, but some wounds don't heal completely. I was diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, and depression. I had nightmares where Bailey and my dad were chasing me through endless chat rooms, their faces morphing together until I couldn't tell them apart. I developed trust issues that affected every relationship I tried to form. How do you learn to trust anyone when your own father orchestrated your exploitation? My mom fell into a deep depression, blaming herself for not seeing the signs. She started drinking heavily, losing jobs because she couldn't keep it together. She'd alternate between smothering me with attention, checking my phone and computer constantly, and completely checking out, spending days in bed staring at the ceiling. I basically had to parent her while still being a teenager myself. The one bright spot was my grandmother, a tough, no-nonsense woman who gave me the stability I desperately needed. She never tiptoed around what happened, never treated me like I was broken. She would say things like, "What they did was unforgivable, but what you do next is what matters." She helped me focus on my future instead of my past. I threw myself into school, determined to graduate early and get to college where nobody knew my story. I studied constantly, partly because I wanted to succeed and partly because it was a way to escape my thoughts. My grandmother helped me apply for scholarships and encouraged me to think about careers where I could help others who had been through similar experiences. I graduated a semester early with straight A's and a scholarship to a state university 3 hours away. Before I left for college, I decided to visit Bailey in prison. My therapist advised against it, but I needed closure. I needed to look him in the eye, not as the vulnerable girl he had manipulated, but as the strong woman I was becoming. My grandmother drove me there and waited in the car. Seeing him in a prison jumpsuit, separated by glass, was surreal. He looked older, thinner, his eyes hollow. Prison hadn't been kind to him, and I felt a grim satisfaction in that. I picked up the phone on my side of the barrier. Why? It was the only question I needed answered. Bailey stared at me for a long moment. "Your dad approached me at a poker game, said he'd caught you looking at porn and was worried about you getting into trouble online, offered me money to keep an eye on you, scare off any real creeps. It was supposed to be a short-term thing." He paused, looking down. "But then I saw how easy it was to manipulate you. And your dad?" He got off on the details, kept asking for more, paying more. It just escalated. I felt nothing looking at him. No anger, no fear, just emptiness. "You ruined my life," I said flatly. Bailey actually laughed. "Kid, your life was ruined the moment you were born to that father. I just played my part." I hung up the phone and walked out, never looking back. I didn't visit my dad. Some relationships can't be repaired, and I had no interest in hearing his excuses. Whatever twisted justification he had for what he did, I didn't need to hear it. He had sent me a few letters from prison, which I burned without reading. College was my fresh start. I changed my last name legally to my grandmother's maiden name. My new identity felt like armor, protecting me from my past. I made new friends who knew nothing about my story. I became known for my academic focus and volunteer work rather than as a victim. I studied psychology, wanting to understand what had happened to me and maybe help others someday. I was particularly interested in studying grooming techniques and online predator behavior, turning my trauma into something that might prevent others from experiencing the same thing. It wasn't all smooth sailing. I had trust issues, especially with men. Dating was a minefield of triggers and panic attacks. I'd flinch when a guy wanted to text too much or asked personal questions too quickly. I avoided online dating completely. The idea of meeting someone through a screen was too reminiscent of my past. But slowly, with more therapy and time, it got easier. I learned to recognize the difference between normal interest and red flags, between genuine connection and manipulation. 4 years into my undergraduate studies, I got a message on social media from a name I didn't recognize, Lily Harper. The message said she'd been Bailey's victim before me, and she'd heard about my case during his trial. She wanted to meet. I was skeptical at first, worried it might be some sick prank or maybe Bailey somehow reaching out from prison. But after exchanging a few messages, I agreed to meet her in a public coffee shop near campus. I arrived early, positioning myself where I could see the door, ready to leave if anything seemed off. Lily was 24, only a few years older than me. She had been 13 when Bailey targeted her through an online forum for young writers. Her story was eerily similar to mine, except in her case, it was her uncle who had set up the arrangement with Bailey. She had never gotten justice. By the time she realized what had happened, the statute of limitations had passed for some of the charges, and her family had pressured her to stay quiet to avoid scandalizing their community. We talked for hours, sharing details that only someone who'd been through it would understand. The way he would use inside jokes to create a sense of intimacy. How he'd remember every detail about our lives but reveal almost nothing about his own. The carefully timed gifts that arrived just when we were feeling vulnerable. It was the first time I'd spoken to someone who truly got it, who didn't look at me with pity or discomfort. Before we parted ways, Lily mentioned that she knew of at least 3 other victims besides us, and the one other girl from the trial. Bailey had been doing this for years, working with different men who wanted to exploit girls they had access to. Some of the cases had never come to light because the girls were too afraid to come forward. That conversation changed everything for me. I realized that putting Bailey and my dad in prison wasn't enough. There were more people involved, more victims suffering in silence. This wasn't just about my personal trauma anymore. It was about a larger system of exploitation that needed to be exposed. With Lily's help, help, I started reaching out to the other victims she knew about. Two of them agreed to meet with us. Together, we formed a support group that quickly grew beyond just Bailey's victims. Girls and women who had experienced similar grooming, whether online or in person, started reaching out after hearing about our group through word of mouth. We created a website for survivors of online grooming and familial exploitation. We shared our stories anonymously, offered resources, and created a network for those who felt alone like I once had. We developed warning signs for parents and teens to watch for, compiled resources for reporting predators, and provided information about trauma recovery. The website caught the attention of a journalist who wanted to do a feature on online predator rings. I agreed to be interviewed anonymously. The article blew up, getting picked up by national news outlets. Suddenly, our little support group was flooded with messages from victims across the country. Some were currently being groomed and didn't know how to escape. Others had suffered in silence for years, thinking they were the only ones who had experienced something like this. We connected them with legal resources, trauma counselors, and most importantly, with each other. A year later, I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee considering stronger laws against online predators and those who facilitate their access to children. Standing at that podium, looking at the panel of lawmakers taking notes as I spoke, I felt a power I'd never experienced before. My story, as painful as it was making a difference. The law that eventually passed included specific provisions for adults who enabled or facilitated online grooming, directly inspired by my case. After completing my bachelor's degree, I went on to get my master's in social work. Today, I run a nonprofit dedicated to educating parents, teachers, and kids about the signs of grooming and exploitation. We've helped pass legislation in 3 states that specifically addresses cases like mine, where family members facilitate the abuse. We provide training for school counselors, run support groups for survivors, and develop educational materials for teens about online safety. Our work has been featured in documentaries and news segments, raising awareness about a form of abuse that often goes unrecognized. Last month, I received word that my dad was up for parole after serving 9 years of his sentence. They asked if I wanted to make a statement to the parole board. I thought about it for days, unsure of what to say, or if I wanted to say anything at all. Part of me wanted to scream that he should never be released, that what he did destroyed my teenage years and continues to affect me today. Another part just wanted to move on, to not give him any more space in my life or thoughts. In the end, I wrote a letter. I didn't argue against his release. That wasn't my call to make. Instead, I detailed how his actions had affected every aspect of my life, how I'd had to rebuild from scratch because of his betrayal. I explained how his violation of the most fundamental trust, that between parent and child, had impacted my ability to form healthy relationships. I ended by saying I had found purpose in helping others, that his crime had ultimately led me to my calling, but that he would never be a part of my life again. I never found out if my letter made any difference. He was denied parole on his first attempt. He'll be eligible again in 2 years, and I'm not sure how I'll feel then. My mom eventually got sober and rebuilt her life. We have a relationship, but it's complicated. She still carries so much guilt, even though I've told her repeatedly that none of it was her fault. She remarried a few years ago to a kind man who knows our history and is patient with her lingering trauma. We talk weekly, and I visit on holidays, but there's still a distance there, a shared pain that makes complete closeness difficult. My grandmother passed away last year, leaving me her house and a letter telling me how proud she was of the woman I'd become despite everything. I miss her terribly. She was the rock that helped me rebuild my life. Her house is now the headquarters for our nonprofit, which feels like the perfect way to honor her memory. As for Bailey, he won't be eligible for parole for another 3 years. Sometimes I worry about what will happen when he gets out, but I refuse to live in fear anymore. I've taken self-defense classes, installed good security systems, and built a strong community around me. I know that the scared, vulnerable girl he manipulated no longer exists. In her place stands a woman who helped put him behind bars and has been working to ensure others like him face justice too. Through our nonprofit work, we've managed to identify and help build cases against 2 other men who were working with Bailey in the same way my dad was. One was convicted last year and sentenced to 10 years. The other case is still pending. Each conviction feels like a small victory in a much larger war against predators who exploit children's trust and innocence. Looking back on that stupid day in 2007 when Kaylee and I thought it would be funny to mess with guys in chat rooms, I wish I could warn my younger self about what was coming. I wish I could tell her to be more careful, to tell a trusted adult when a grown man shows interest in a teenage girl, to recognize the red flags that seem so obvious to me now. But then I think about all the girls our organization has helped, all the predators we've helped put away, and I wonder if things happened the way they needed to. I'm 28 now, the same age Bailey was when he started grooming me. I have a fiance who knows my whole story and loves me anyway. We met in a survivor advocacy group where he volunteered. His younger sister had a similar experience to mine. He understood understands my triggers, respects my boundaries, and never makes me feel broken for having them. We're planning to adopt someday. There are too many kids out there who need safe homes, and we both feel strongly about providing the security and support that many of us didn't have growing up. Sometimes I still get messages from people who remember my case, usually just offering support or sharing their own stories. But last week, I got a different kind of message. It was from Bailey's son, now 19 years old. He wanted me to know that he'd disowned his father after learning what he'd done, that he was sorry for the pain his family had caused. He asked if we could meet sometime. I haven't decided yet if I'll say yes. Part of me wants to close that chapter completely, but another part wonders if meeting him might help us both heal. What I do know is that I'm no longer defined by what happened to me. I'm defined by what I've done with it. For any other survivors reading this, know that your story doesn't end with the trauma. It's just one chapter in a much longer book that you get to write. And if you're a kid reading this, please be careful online. Not everyone is who they claim to be, and sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from. Trust your instincts, save evidence, and tell someone, a teacher, a friend's parent, anyone, if something doesn't feel right. I didn't realize I had options back then, but you do. As for me, I'm still writing my story. Every day I choose not to be a victim but an advocate. Every person we help, every law we change, every predator we stop, that's my revenge. And it's so much more satisfying than I ever could have imagined.